anyone has any questions.
For the beginning, I would congratulate for this work in this COVID situation. I think your response was really, really quick.
Yeah, we had a very short space of time, all right, Linc.
Margaret, can I ask a question? Now, this is me speaking from an Irish perspective, but could you maybe just give a bit more insight to the group about, you know, the place of special? I know we're supposed to be moving towards this inclusive, the inclusive school, but there is a body of people that still support that idea that there is a need for very specific intervention for some groups of children. And this is where I suppose there is that a notion that we need to keep special schools in the mix, or, you know, what your feeling is, because even Maria's school, Maria, you work in it's a special class within a mainstream school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I suppose Maria will join in here as well, because she has, you know, she's there on the cold face. I suppose, Angie, to answer your question, it's a dilemma I've had my whole life. I can give examples of when I was in primary school, and one of my peers came into school on a Monday morning crying, and she was crying because her little brother was gone back to school in Dublin. He was in a school for the deaf in Dublin, and I was living in the west coast of Ireland. And I remember at the time thinking, why can't he go up the road to my brother's school? And I remember being heartbroken myself. I think where you have any kind of a binary system, I think any place where there is another, you will have otherisms. And I suppose I want my child to be the child, not the other child.
Okay.
I have a niece with, and she's an adult niece now. I have a niece with very complex autism, functioning really in the moderate to severe range. She went to a special school. She went to applied behavior analysis. She went to an ABA school. The mainstream school would not have been the least restrictive environment for her. And I totally acknowledge that, and I accept it. She wouldn't have received an appropriate education, and those around her would not have received an appropriate education had she been in a mainstream school. So I'm in that dilemmic space all my life, Angie. And I think really, for the most part, most of us in Ireland as teachers would feel like that. The New Brunswick model that has been presented to us by government, I suppose there are a lot of differences. You know, it's a smaller population. It has one teachers union. It has, we're probably as yet not comparing like for like.
Right. Okay. No, that's very good. I think Marianne has a question. Marianne,
yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Actually, my question was very similar, because it just was in my mind as well at the beginning when Margaret mentioned that there are specialized institutions as well as inclusive schools. So I was just wondering if there is an intention of getting rid of specialized education, specialized institutions in Ireland or not, or is it a kind of out of the question thing? So is it for the future? Is it an intention to get rid of those institutions, or?
I think the intention is there. I think the intention has probably been there since Salamanca. I think there is a major drive, and I would be supportive of that, of schools for students with mild general learning disability or mild intellectual disability. I do ask the question, why aren't they in their local school? And while we have excellent examples of such schools, really excellent examples of those schools. I suppose the question is what happens to those students when post 18, when they have gone to school, because our special schools span from primary through to post-primary. It's the one school. And I suppose it does beg the question, they have been removed from their own environment. And what happens when they return at 18 and they haven't gone to school with others? You know, and there's my use of otherism. I think it's actually interesting. Baroness Warnock coined the phrase special educational needs, or SEN, and was all in favour of inclusion back in the late 70s, early 80s, and throughout her life. But she actually made that statement in 2005 about special schools. Like, there's no point in a student being in a mainstream school and not participating and not feeling that they belong. Baroness Warnock actually made that statement about special schools. She herself had actually come full circle and saw the need for a continuum of support, for a continuum of need. But yes, we are watching that space here in Ireland.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Questions on the chat function, Angie. Will I just answer those? Sorry to cut across you.
Yes, I just wanted to tell that there are 2 questions in the chat, so please, you can go ahead. Yes.
Okay, okay. I'll type away, you keep chatting.
So there's a question for Maria. How did your booklet reach the public? How was it promoted?
We kind of used as many avenues as we possibly could. So we used the media. As I Am and SuperValue are 2 kind of powerhouses. And As I Am charity, the founder of that, Adam Harris, is very well known. So Adam was kind of key to promoting it. And then Professor Emer Ring from Mary I promoted it. And then we went on, we had television interviews, and we had the local newspapers. Then every SuperValue store across the country had the posters and promoted it within their stores for the public, which is where it was available. So people just had to go to the counter and ask for it, and they were given the free resource. So we've used as many platforms, social media included, as possible to try and get the word out there. And the more it was received, the more it was highlighted through everything. So we're still trying to keep it live.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
And the next question is quite tricky. How many years or decades takes to change the teachers' attitudes towards inclusive education?
Yeah.
And she would like to know, the person who asked the question wonders about the key success points of change management.
Yeah, it's I saw the question there. It's a really good question. And I suppose, you know, one of my slides will say that it is the ABC. It is a lot to do with attitude. I think one of the key successes is that in schools, this discourse, you know, on the ground, at staff meetings, teachers have to engage in discourse. They have to be honest about their attitude. If there's an attitude that this child doesn't belong here, he belongs down there, up there, across there, in another. So I suppose I've used that word belong again. So if you have teachers who feel like that, well, you know, we can have all the policies we want. So I suppose I am a great believer in policy as cycle. You know, we can have policies handed down from on top, but really, unless the key stakeholders, who are called teachers, buy in, you will not have policy implementation. So you need to have that policy cycle where one is informing the other, where one context, and I'm being specific to the context of practice, that context has to be the context of influence to inform government, because as you know, governments come and go. We have ministers for education who come and go. Some of them have, you know, will have a pet agenda coming from their own lived experience and their own habitus. They'll have their own attitudes. Currently, we have a Minister for Education and we have a Junior Minister for Special Education. Now, I don't know where that came from. Again, I'm not in favour of silos. I wouldn't have been in favour of that move. So sometimes we take 2 steps forward and we do take 1 step back. But you have to have buy-in from teachers on the ground. That means then we have to have CPD for teachers on the ground. We have to look at educating our teachers for inclusive practice. So they do have to have specialized competencies. So that's across the curriculum and in discrete modules. So currently our BEd nationally, our teacher training nationally, our teacher education nationally, all students in the country have 2 modules on inclusive education. Now, I know you're saying that ain't much, Margaret, and it ain't much. All students can avail of a specialism. Now, that's highly sought after. And if they look to a specialism in special education, they actually leave their 4 years undergraduate education with 5 modules in inclusive special education. We have a national program on offer to teachers in special education to return to higher education institutes to do postgraduate and masters in special education. I suppose Maria is an example here with us. Maria returned and did a postgrad in special education, went on to do her master's, and now she's a PhD student in our Department of Educational Psychology, Inclusive and Special Education. So I suppose to answer your question very simply, it's very complex.
Yeah.
But it does go back to attitudes of the key stakeholders who are implementing policy that was really advocated by Salamanca.
I would second that, Margaret. Absolutely everything that Margaret has said there. From my own experience, like I'm teaching in a mainstream school and I was a mainstream teacher. And from what happened to us, we had an influx of students with autism into our mainstream classes, and we felt like we weren't meeting their needs, that we weren't supporting.
Oh, oops, the internet.
Oh, we've lost you, Maria.
It's the oopsie cobalt this here.
It's the wind.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what a pity. So maybe she can come back then. But
or maybe you can type, Maria.
Yeah. One related question came to my mind. So what's the attitude of parents? Because, you know, in Hungary, people say, oh, it's fine to have special classes. It's very nice to have all these kids with autism or SPD or whatever, but please not in the class where my child is in. So what about the parents' attitude? Are you working on that, or how are you doing that?
I think we're more alike than we are different, being honest. And parent voice is important, and I suppose it has grown in, you know, parents' agency has grown, but you'll always have parents who have greater agency than others, and you know that's an international phenomenon too, and we won't go to social class, etc., etc. Parents are, we have an EPSON Act, and you'll see that on my later slides, the Education for Persons with Special Educational Needs Act, which came out in 2004. Now, we had an Education Act in 1998, the first one in our state, and it was legislation for all children, including children with and without any form of disability. So again, like we had another one, you know, we had another in 2004. Why did we need another? But it was to further provide for, and you'll see that in my slides, and you know, they're interesting enough slides actually when you look at them and analyze them. Parents, that legislation didn't roll out fully because we, you know, the international phenomenon of our crash in 2008. So it still isn't mandatory legally to have an education plan, even though it's good practice. You have to document your planning, etc., etc. Parents do have the legal right to see that individual education plan, or what we call it now, student support plan. They have a legal right to be involved in it. They have a legal right to be actively engaged in it. They have a legal right to see it and to sign up to it. So I suppose that's the first thing I would say about parents. So Maria is back, I'd say.
Sorry, apologies. My internet's the same as yours, Margaret.
Exactly. The wind is howling. Yeah. So it is mandated for in the Education Act, and parent voice is, I suppose, in very, where practice is good, parent voice is very cherished, because we can't teach without the parent really in many respects. That said, I suppose on a practical level, anecdotal evidence and, you know, some research suggests that many of our children are now included in mainstream schools at primary level. Children attending special schools at that level has certainly decreased, unless you're talking about complex needs and severe and profound, etc. Many parents are still making a choice to investigate special schools at a post-primary level. Now, I'm not sure what that's about, but I suppose from my own gut, and this is just my own opinion, I find it hard to negotiate a timetable with 9 slots in a day. All our students who go on to post-primary are negotiating timetables with 9 slots. They're negotiating larger environments. They're negotiating, all life starts and is kind of slotted by the word has gone out of my head, by going to your lockers at post-primary level. It's a noisy, busy environment. At primary level, you have one classroom teacher. Yes, you may have support teachers, but you have that secure go-to person who doesn't change for at least a year, unless there's reasons for leave. In any one day at post-primary school, you could have 9 or more teachers. Yes. So again, coming back to, yes, it is, parents' choice has to be respected. If the parent wants their child in this particular school, yes, the parent has that right to have their child in that particular school.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Ludmila is asking, how many children are usually in the class in primary schools?
That's a good question too. We have a pupil-teacher ratio. I think it's someplace between 23 and 25. Maria, you might correct me on this. Yeah. But what we also have is, that's kind of a little bit of
that's the ideal.
That is the pupil-teacher ratio if you ask the government. But it's kind of skewed then in places. We have many very small schools. So we can have small schools in country areas that might have 19 pupils. There's 2 teachers in that school. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we have developing schools in very busy urban areas, and they may have 33 plus in their class for that particular year. Yes, they'll get another teacher next year, but our numbers go on the 30th of September of a previous year. So our pupil-teacher ratio is not ideal. Whereas, yes, it may also be a reason why parents who have that social and cultural capital may look to a class where there's 6 in this class, and my child might be getting greater attention. Maria, you can speak to this probably a lot better than I can.
Yeah, and in our classes, we are designated disadvantaged school. So our model, we have a different pupil-teacher ratio, so we operate in 20:1. So that's not how much allocation we get the allocation of teachers. So it's not necessarily how it plays out in every classroom. Some of our classrooms are 25 plus. It just depends on the way that it runs. Then with the special classes attached to mainstream, like in my setting, the model is 6 to 1 to 2. So there are 6 students with autism, 1 teacher and 2 supports. So 2 SNAs or ISAs, special needs assistants or inclusion sports assistants. So they, with the special class, then the pupils integrate as necessary and when they're ready. So they integrate in and out of the mainstream class, and they're supported to do so based on their needs. So it's kind of a bit of a transition between both, really.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions?
Yes, I have one.
Go ahead, please.
How is the procedure about getting permission to translate your booklet to Croatian language?
We should look into that actually, Margaret, couldn't we?
Yeah.
I could ask as I am, couldn't I? And we could get that to you, yeah?
It would be
Okay.
it would be a
To
return
Angela.
to it would be a return to as I am, and SuperValue funded it, so I'm sure it would be permission would need to be sought from both of those. But if it helps children internationally, why not? Yeah, Maria, I think
Okay, I will do that, and I'll get it back to you, whatever information I can get through Angela. Would that be okay, Angela?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Is that okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
No problem. And I'll
Margaret,
put up the website link, Angela. I'll send that to you that you can
Okay.
share with everybody. So
Okay,
at
I'll
least
do
be
that.
able to see what's there and what's available. There's lots more there.
Yeah. Margaret, just one thing to add. I think, isn't it fair to say that teacher education in Ireland has been very innovative in promoting social. I think a lot of the change at the ground level has come from teacher education.
Yeah.
So you have,
Yeah.
young teachers like Maria, who have come out of teacher education in the last 10, 15 years that would have a very strong grounding in inclusive, in what they call real inclusive education.
I would totally agree with you, Angie. I think a great strength of I don't know if this is the same in your countries. You might relate or communicate that to me. Our system that we educate general education teachers. So all our teachers have a degree in education. That's at primary and post-primary. I'll return to primary now because I'm of a primary teaching background myself, but we are all very different in the United States. We are all educated to be primary school teachers of that child from 4 to 12 plus. There isn't a separate route for the special education teacher. It is presumed that if you are the special education teacher, that you have experience, and also that it would be liked if you had a postgraduate qualification. So I think that's a real strength in our education and teacher education system. I think we're new to focusing in on special education and inclusive education in a general level for mainstream teachers. Maria will probably now, and Maria will speak to this herself. Maria may not have as much had as much on special education and inclusive education as an undergraduate.
Yep.
Undergraduates in the 3-year program. We have only recently gone to a 4-year program. Graduates in the 3-year program would all say without exception, we did not have enough on special education and inclusive education. However, that said, I think there has been an openness among us because of our education, teacher education within the 3-year program. I think that openness to inclusive education. I think attitudes were definitely being influenced, but maybe specific competencies and skills weren't permeated through all curricular areas. And I think that is definitely changing. We have had a real upsurge really in the last 3 decades. 1998, our Minister for Education gave a press release where he said there would be an automatic response to student need on the ground. And that has cost the state an awful lot of money. But I think with that statement, I think a lot of mindsets were changed. But yes, we definitely have a very good, the other thing I'd like to say from what Angie said there as well is primary teaching in Ireland is highly sought after. So our students going in on the programs, what we call, they're coming from a final exam at second level where they have achieved very high results. So the raw material going into our programs is of a very high level. And that really matters because special education, inclusive education, you are required to be flexible, as you know. That is the greatest competence, to be flexible. But that demands an intellectual capacity, as well as having a particular attitude towards that child is somebody's child, that child belongs in my classroom. I'll hand over to you, Maria, about our teacher education system.
Yeah, I came through the system in the 3-year degree at that time, and we had very limited. It was only through a specialism, and it was highly sought after at the time. And it was called a PEDOP, and not everybody got into it. I didn't get into it at the time. I had gone on a language route at the time. I hadn't gone into special ed. So I was at a disadvantage straight away. In years to come, there has been a wave, and Margaret will second that, in how much interest there has been around special education. And in fairness, the government have started funding. So that graduate program that Margaret was talking about is funded by the government. So it's a year level 9 qualification, as we say, at university level that I took on, at that graduate diploma. And it's supported by the government insofar as they provide 2 months block release for me as a primary school teacher. So they provide a sub for me in school to go and study for a 2 months release straight into college, where we study on site. So because it's supported by the government, there's much more uptake on it. That has been very of special education, especially in Limerick. It has had a huge impact on the climate and on the whole landscape. There are so many more special classes opening. When I opened the special class in our school 5 years ago, I was certainly met with aversion, and I still had to convince people that this was a good idea. And I remember a phrase from someone who was at management level saying, be very careful, you'll end up being a dumping ground for special needs, nobody else will take them. This attitude was still there. Thankfully, we overcame that, and that attitude is kind of growing out, for all the want of a better word. It's moving away, thankfully, and people will see, because of what we have done and because of all those anecdotal evidence that shows how successful it can be. And parent power is really, really powerful, and the voice of the parent, and when they speak to each other and how they promote what you're doing, and they're so grateful for the support. That has been tremendous for us in our school, and it keeps you going. So that has changed everything. Now the B.Ed program, because as Margaret said, I'm a PhD student of Margaret's in Mary I, and I am very fortunate to work lecturing in Mary I, and I work with the B.Eds. And you can see the difference. What they're getting now and what they're being exposed to has been phenomenal. In my school, I am a PST member, so I am a professional service teacher, which means I support probation of students, work with them when they're being probated, their first year out. So they do a year where they're supported by us in school. They're trained teachers. It's called Readjust Program. And as part of that, I go in and I observe, and we provide supports to the younger teachers. But you can see the wealth of knowledge that they are bringing to schools now. That's affecting change on the ground. Those teachers who hadn't the opportunity to avail of CPD, there's more of the younger teachers coming in who have had it. So we'll say in the last, I'd say 7 or 8 years, there has been a huge impact. Wouldn't you agree, Margaret? I think CPD is one of the biggest things, professional development for teachers, and supported by resources at the government level. We need support, and they need support on the ground and in the schools. Like, to change a school to provide a special class or to provide for special needs, it needs money. There's no point in saying one thing and mean another. It really does need money, and changing our attitudes and going along that way and upskilling help towards that.
Yeah, I agree. And there is you know, with money comes respect, and the postgraduate diploma, the PGD in special education, has been financed by our Department of Education since 2003. It's available in all our HEIs. As Marie says, it has had a ripple effect in Limerick because of Mary I. I'm sure we think we're the best, you know, but it is available. It is available right across our country in all the HEIs. In Mary, we take 50 graduates on that program every year. Again, highly sought after. We have large waiting lists to access that program, and to take on board 50 teachers, and this is at primary, post-primary level and special schools. Just those 50 teachers in our Institute of Mary Immaculate College cost the government €1 million. So it does take money, it does take funding, but at least for special education teachers, that option is there. For mainstream teachers, then there are government support services that support the schools, government agencies who go out and support schools. And we also have what we call education centres, and their main role is also continuing professional development, and they were established under the Education Act of 1998. So I suppose what we're saying is we have really good raw material coming into teaching, and it is well funded. It's well funded by the Department of Education and Skills, because education has always been valued in Ireland, really, and that is reflected at all levels.
Great. Yeah. Glenn has a question. Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks both and all contributors so far. I have a question which doesn't relate directly to the compulsory education sector, and that is at both ends. One is in terms of input towards the early years, which we know are the most significant in the children's development, no matter what their differences, is post-school. And if you have any thoughts on how, because the policies that governments come up with must necessarily recognise the importance both of the early years and post-school.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we have, I suppose, Glenn, one thing we do have in Mary Immaculate College as well, we have the Linc Program, yep, which is it's a training program for the early years, and Professor Emer Ring probably spoke to you on that. That has had a huge impact on what's happening in our preschools and in the early year settings, because they're inclusion support teachers. They're taught specifically in the area of inclusion. They get an awful lot information on that, and it helps support our young students. Also, we provide 2 years of free play school for our students for preschool, so they get 2 years before they come to school, and that has had a huge impact on us in mainstream. Now, I'm in an early education special class, so I teach students that are 4 to 8 years old. So we have seen a direct impact of that program and the 2 years preschooling into us, into the mainstream school, and it has had a huge impact on the children and how they're supported coming into schools. For the post-primary school, when they finish post-primary school, we have national development programs and frameworks that are in place. Very often it's our students from special schools that attend, and they go on to do specific training depending on the areas that they're interested in. Now, we still have, unfortunately, we still have 80% of adults with autism are unemployed. Yeah. You know, and we still have that. We're working towards how we can improve that. And as Margaret said, like our graduate diploma, the postgraduate diploma, includes post-primary teachers. So we're trying to meet that level in all different areas and support them. And I know that charity, As I Am, are doing tremendous work in this area at the moment. And what they're trying to do is set up autism-friendly communities. So to make communities more aware of the people with needs that are in their community and how we can support them. And I know that there are lots of places now taking on programs of supporting students. We also have in Mary Immaculate College, we have the other programs. Margaret, you'll fill them in on that. You might help them with that to degree level for students with disabilities. We have 2, don't we?
Yeah, I suppose going along with everything Maria has said there, Glenn, we may not have been great from the point of view of a national system at the early childhood years, but recently we've introduced the ECCE scheme, whereas Maria says all children, and whether this is equitable or not, all children in our state are entitled to 2 years free play school. Like, that's just a very recent initiative.
Yeah.
We are very proud of, we have a degree course here for students studying ECCE, Early Childhood Care and Education, which is a level 8 program. And all students there complete an FYP. It's a very challenging program, and they all do significant placement out in that sector. But that sector is evolving. Programs like the Linc Program, the Leadership for Inclusion in these settings have had a very positive effect, as Maria has said. In some of our institutions, Mary Immaculate College being one of them, we have what we call university placement for our children with intellectual disability. You may be familiar with the one in Trinity, with Michael Shevlin. We are delighted that we have, and we're very proud of the one that we have here in Mary Immaculate College, and that's led by Dr. Anne O'Byrne and Dr. Orla Slattery, who are our colleagues in our department. Some of those students, they have discrete classes, but some will actually attend particular classes in the arts or across education and arts faculties.
Yeah, that's
so that program is specifically
learning
for children. Yes, Angie, give me the title there.
It's the Certificate for General Learning. So it's a 1-year course that's targeted at adults with they would have intellectual disabilities. But it is important to bear in mind that there is a socioeconomic issue there, that it's children from higher socioeconomic groups that are getting access to that. So we do have an issue with, there is a social class issue there as well, where, for instance, if you're a working class child with intellectual disabilities, where do you go? And currently we do have those children that do fall through the cracks. But yeah, certainly over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of improvements, particularly at the education sector, and I suppose a drive at higher education towards inclusion, because higher education institutes like Mary Immaculate College, the universities, are tasked. They have to include diversity within their groups, and they get money for those students. So there's a policy initiative, and there's also, the desire on the part of colleges of education to provide. We've seen that initiative as well. So it is, it hasn't really come from one specific area. It's like there's been a perfect storm that has come together to facilitate that. Now, Mary I would certainly be one of the leaders in Ireland in relation to inclusive education. We have, as I said, the Linc Program, and we've got that certificate in contemporary living, contemporary and adult living, I think it's called, for children with special education needs.
Yeah, my question, if I just add a little more, if that's okay, if there's nobody else with a question waiting.
Now, Alenka wants to ask a question, but no, we continue, Glenn.
Just very simply, what I've found is that across many countries is it's the least well qualified people who end up in special needs support. I'm interested in what professional development is available for them, and that's an issue. And secondly, what multidisciplinary consultations occur before child starts school, for example, because a child might be recognized with a physical difference, for example, or a well-known genetic difference, but there are other things which emerge. And how best might we, as educators seeking to provide policymakers with ways forward, can we take this? Maybe it's another question, another conference.
No, yeah, it's actually an interesting question in our climate currently, because I suppose with kind of action, etc. And our system now in primary and post-primary is not necessarily diagnose driven, as I made the point on my slide. It is about identification of need.
Yep.
And that need may have to be identified at. Am I gone now again?
No, you're here, still here.
So increasingly there is talk about that child, I suppose, being enabled to come to school in some ways with a clean slate because of data protection. So there are moves in that direction. That the classroom teacher in junior infants. At one stage, we talked about transition plans. We talked about transition programs, going from preschool into primary, going from primary into post-primary. And on our programs like the postgrad and special ed, we would talk to those transition plans quite a lot. But there is sort of an increasing move towards my data is data. Back again, Angie has made a valid point around, there's very little we can do around parent social and cultural capital, but this is society tends to reinvent itself, no more than Stephen Ball would always say. But there is that kind of, there is an increasing dilemma now happening between preschool and primary school about the assessment, if there has been one with a multidisciplinary agency, not necessarily travelling with that child. Now, Maria, you're in an infant school, so you'll talk to this a lot better than I will.
Absolutely, Glenn, and Margaret is 100% right. As of March, it so when we send out forms to the new junior infants that are applying to the school, we are not pertinent to information regarding a child's diagnosis. So we cannot ask if a child has a special education need. Now, if the parent provides that information, all well and good, but we are not, because of data protection and GDPR and all of those rules, they brought it in that we cannot put it on our admissions policy, which has opened an awful lot of dilemmas for schools, and it has created kind of there's to and fro, and there's positive and there's negative of both. Are we prepared to meet their needs then if we don't know in advance, or is it their entitlement that they just come to school and we assess them as they go? So there's kind of, we're very much in a new, but that is definitely the culture that is changing.
And that's a competence issue, because many teachers are even school leaders, and there may be nobody in a school team that is competent to make that formal assessment. I think it's a disabling factor, which is a problem and maybe needs to be readdressed. However, I'll stop there.
Okay.
I know, Glenn, and I know anecdotally we've had schools around us contact us looking for support from our school that have had the challenge of junior infants having 6 or 7 very complex needs students all turn up in September at the one time and nobody is prepared. And in that instance, you don't have your special needs assistants or your inclusion support assistants in the school necessarily. So it does bring some challenges, Glenn, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Alenka, we'll finish now. So Alenka is the last question.
My question was just about the latest debate. I wonder how exactly does this procedure goes in Ireland. The procedures. So if I understood, the primary school in Ireland decides itself which child gets a special need, and that I'm interested in that procedure. How does this go? This is different as in Slovenia. How is this diagnostic? In Slovenia, we also have the problem that parents have more power than the special education science. So the parents' voice is stronger than the specialist's voice. So how is this in Ireland?
I suppose, Alenka, it's somewhat similar. Just in 2005, we introduced what was called a general allocation model of special education teaching to schools, and that's primary and post-primary. So the general, let's call it the general special education teacher or learning support teacher, as it was at that, support with what we called high incident disability. So in other words, mild general learning disability and others, the ones you consider high incidence. We had another category then, which was drawn down. We had another category of special education teacher called the resource teacher. And to gain access to the resource teacher, you had to have a formal diagnosis. So hours for that teacher were calculated as follows. If you had a student in your class with autism, that gave the school 5 hours. If you had a student in your school with speech and language disorder, it was 4 hours. If you had etc., and it went down along through this, and those hours, they came at those hours based on pupil-teacher ratios in special schools. In 2017, those two models were amalgamated into what really is a general allocation to schools. So now we have a general allocation of special ed teacher to all schools in primary and post-primary, and it's called the special education teacher. Now we were going towards inclusion, but the government has decided to call this professional a special education teacher, not an inclusion teacher or support for inclusion teacher. So, you know, things and roundabouts too. Every school has a particular allocation based on a profile of their school of special education teachers. So yes, you are correct. It is up to the school to decide a continuum of support for that continuum of need. Is diagnosis considered? Of course, a school will consider diagnosis. If as Marie says, they know about that diagnosis, etc., etc. But the pillars of our new model are that schools have to identify need, have to be seen to support that need, and have to be seen to address that, to monitor progress. So there are so schools have greater agency, yes, but schools have far greater responsibility than heretofore.
So there must be some kind of monitoring then, I suppose.
There is national monitoring. We have to return, the schools have to return their school profiles. We have to return, and Maria will again speak to this, we have to return percentiles and standard scores from standardized assessments at particular junctures in the student and primary school's life. So yes, there is monitoring. We have an inspectorate that visits our schools, and we also have special educational needs officers who monitor resourcing to schools. That includes the special education teachers, and it also includes allocation of SNAs. Now, Maria, again, might speak more to this at a practical level on the ground.
Marie, you need to mute or unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, our profiles in schools then are based on gender is part of it. So how many boys and how many girls. It's also based on where you're located. So if it's a DESH Band 1 school, by that I mean designated disadvantaged, such as our school, we have more of an allocation. Then what they do is they look back on our standardized scores to a point. So we furnish the department with results in first class and in fifth class, and for our students. So every school produces these results, and it's given back to a central database, and that feeds into your allocation. So they take on board different elements. The special education needs officers then are responsible for allocating of SNAs, so our special needs assistants, and the resources that go with that. So that has a huge impact on how we work with our students. So if we identify as a need, because we're trained and because of that, all of this has happened in our schools and the profiles, and we've all been upskilled in this. We all had to engage in training for it. So because of that, we can identify need at school, and it goes through the continuum of support that Margaret highlighted. So once a student moves from classroom-based support to school support for some, school support, once it goes into that middle tier, we are responsible to gather information and assessments and data. So it has to be backed by assessments from the class teacher as well as the special education teacher. And from there, you start to build a pupil profile, which is what we call it. And that's how we access additional resources. So if we want more support, we can call on our psychological service. We can call on our special education support services to come in. They will observe what's happening in our schools, and we present them with additional information then. If we feel like we need more support for the students that we have on any given year, that's how we access it. So you're all the time being asked, you're all the time being called upon to produce valid information and relevant data backing what you're saying, basically.
I suppose it's also important to mention as well that we currently in Ireland have a pilot scheme operating, which we call the demonstration model, where schools have access to speech and language therapy and occupational therapy. So if you watch the NCSE website with regard to that, they're due to publish a report on how that pilot scheme is operating, and it would be with a view to roll out across the country. But as Maria says earlier on, that's all highly dependent on resources and probably has more to do with our Minister for Finance than our Minister for Education.
Great. Okay, thanks, Margaret. I think unless anyone else has anything to do or to say, all that remains is on behalf of the group, it's to thank Maria and Margaret for giving up your time and for wonderful presentations this afternoon.
No problem.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Virtual clapping.
Yes, yes,
Lovely,
no, thank you.
lovely
No.
to meet you. Lovely to meet you all. And as we always, as we all discover, we are definitely more the same than we are different.
Yes.
So we'll stay in. Maria and I will stay in touch with you through Angie, and I hope these 2 hours have been of interest and
No,
of
you were brilliant, Margaret.
and
You were brilliant,
some
Margaret.
use.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Margaret.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maria.
Slán.
Slán.